Hey everybody, Ty here again with another week of Listen Live. We're really excited this week to host another week of Listen Live, not for a few reasons. The first one being that I put on a Hawaiian shirt to pretend like I actually left my room today. But the other reason is so those of you who follow Listen for a Change know that what we do is we feature stories from voices that are unheard. And every single month in the past, we used to have in-person story hours, which is how a lot of you have come to know us. We featured 3 storytellers in one evening. They would tell really powerful personal stories that we just don't get to hear on a day-to-day basis. And so what we're doing now with our weekly Listen Live is we're looking to bring back that same format. And so this is the first week. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been kind of trial testing this and interviewing people based on their experiences with around this pandemic. But this week, we actually have a very special guest who is going to be here to share with us that one story of his life. That one story that he doesn't really tell people on a day-to-day basis, but truly defines who he is. And that's what we're going to be doing from here on out. And so if you don't know of us, welcome. We are a nonprofit organization. What we do is we use personal storytelling to break the cycle of discrimination and make sure that people get outside of their own heads. And that's more important now than ever. I know many of you, like myself, are feeling a little bit heavy this week in particular. On top of everything else that's happening, we're yet again seeing more, violence and racial discrimination being committed upon certain communities, and we have every right to be angry. And I'm seeing how, on social media and in the news, how a lot of people feel like they want to be responding right now, or what they can possibly do in reaction to everything that's going on. And in addition to, taking action, calling representatives, speaking out on behalf of injustice, once you get to the point of having to, reprimand police officers and train officers to respond a certain way to individuals who look a certain way, I feel like at that point we're already a little bit too late in the game. What Listen for a Change does, as I mentioned before, is we do use storytelling to combat discrimination. And at the heart of all discrimination is a lack of compassion, a lack of empathy, a lack of seeing each other for who we really are and listening to each other's stories and reaching out to each other's humanity. And so today's story hour, I want to break down a few things on how it's going to happen because it's a little bit different than in the past. So first off, this again, for those of you who are joining, this is another week of Listen Live. It's live storytelling on Instagram. And today we're featuring, I haven't even introduced our guest yet, but we're featuring a very special guest who comes to us through a special connection. But this video is going to be reposted on Instagram after this, and then it's also going to be posted on Facebook and YouTube for those who don't have Instagram. I want to start off by explaining a common ground rule that I want everyone who is listening to this to follow. And it's really important. When we run our workshops, this is the only thing that we tell our workshop participants that they have to do. And that's pause yourself. Pause you. So what that means is when you are listening to the story today, I want you to listen as authentically and with the least amount of judgment as possible. This is a safe space for our storytellers. It's not necessarily a safe space for you. We hope that nothing comes out that really, makes you uncomfortable or triggers you, but sometimes there might be things that are said that will and challenge you. And the goal isn't for you to listen to the story today and think about how you would act and what you would do, but it's to listen as authentically and open-mindedly as possible. So that's the only rule, is pause yourself. Pause whatever you're bringing in with you to this story hour and truly open up to the story you're about to hear. Do support and appreciate our storyteller. I'm about to bring our storyteller on in a second, and this is it's really scary to do this. I've done this before, and I've done it on stage, and our storytellers used to do it on stage, and just because it's not on stage now doesn't mean that it's not frightening as F. And it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability. So please encourage, send thoughtful comments, ask thoughtful questions, but keep it positive. Again, this is a safe space for our storyteller guest today. And we will have some time at the end for some questions from you, our listeners. But I'm about to bring on our storyteller in a second. Let me just double check that he is on here, and he is. So I'm going to... I want to introduce our storyteller a little bit. So our storyteller... Hey!
Hey,
Sergio.
how's it going,
Hey.
Ty? How are you?
Good. I was just about to introduce you. So I'm going to read a little bit from your bio. Sorry, now my head is like cut off
Yeah,
at the
I
top
know.
here. I got to like
You could
scoot
have told me to
down.
wear my Hawaiian shirt. I would have gone with the Hawaiian theme.
I know. It's burning hot today. And I'm like, you know what? I was in a t-shirt before this. I'm going to put on something a little festive. So Sergio, you are an advocate for building inclusive programs that create economic opportunity for underserved talent and entrepreneurs. You are also an advocate for equitable access to kidney care, which is what you're going to be talking to us about today, as you navigate your own kidney failure and the challenges of daily home dialysis. Now, by day, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about this, but you are the founder and CEO, I didn't know this, of Next Shift Learning, a learning experience and technology studio that prepares job seekers for the future of work. And then by night, you are a connected machine that keeps you alive and stable for 11 hours a day. So, Sergio, I do want to tell our audience today that you were connected to us by Miss Tiffany Price,
Yeah,
who
go
is
Tiffany.
a great supporter of both mine and the organization. She works at the K-Core Center. She's a wonderful human being. Anybody with the middle name Hood is going to be a wonderful person and a lot of fun. So thank you, Tiffany. I know you're watching, for connecting us. Now, Sergio, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to learn about us.
Yeah, totally. Thanks again, Ty, for that introduction. Just a quick background on me. I grew up in the Coachella Valley. I was originally born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Immigrated when I was about 6 months old, and we lived in LA for a little bit, but then moved down to the desert. Most of you know it for the Coachella. So our festival every April with headliners like Beyonce. I know my wife is watching this, so she'll appreciate the Beyonce reference and shout out. But I grew up in predominantly it was a rural community, low income, middle class neighborhood. I have two younger brothers. Both parents immigrated from Mexico. My dad has a sixth grade education. Mom got her GED. First in the family to go to college. There's this whole intersectional identities that I'm sure will come out as we talk. But ultimately, have moved back to the Bay Area after I married the love of my life in September of 2017. Went to grad school and then ended up working at the K-Por Center. So I'm still at the K-Por Center. I've sort of launched a business, which is like what you were referring to earlier, but still at the K-Por Center, running inclusive programming for a national grant that we're operating. And Tiffany and I and a couple of my colleagues have been talking a lot about storytelling, the power of healing through storytelling, and had some serious things happen last summer around my health that I wasn't ready to share so publicly. I mean, even as I was prepping for this, I had to dig back through I end up like writing a lot, and there was a blog that 3 pages worth of just like emotions and what I was going through at the moment when I think I was just grieving with my wife. We went to Santa Barbara for a weekend in July, and just rereading that just kind of brought back all of what I was going through at that point, and I finally felt ready to just talk with you and share openly about what it's like not just to be a dialysis patient, but also just like what it means to bounce back from setbacks, particularly around when it comes to your health, and in this case, something that I really can't control. Um, and that's a little bit of me and how we got connected and why we're here today.
Yeah, I want to tell people, I want to share the name of your story because I find it so compelling. You know, this is a perspective when we first spoke a couple weeks ago that I had never heard of. And even, having my grandma who does dialysis, but this was a very unique perspective that you had to share. So your story, you entitled it Failing Body, Resilient Life. And I have a feeling that we're going to learn a lot more about why you chose to give it that title, but it's on how perseverance, determination, and faith was born from battling to stay healthy despite your failing kidneys. And thank you again for making your journey to us through Tiffany. We're so honored to have you here. And before, we really learn kind of the heart of your story and what you want to share with us today, I kind of want to backpedal a little bit and go back to, Sergio as a kid. You talked about growing up in Jalisco and then moving to the desert in California. But tell us a little bit about what you were like as a kid. Like what were your dreams and motivations? Like where was your heart back then? What did you want to do with your life?
Yeah. So I was thinking about like, I mean, anyone that you asked that knew me growing up would probably say things like, Sergio is like your typical schoolboy nerd, constantly nosing books, spending free time in the library, always raising his hand, a little bit of a show off, I think, just wanting to be right. But I think there was this like in my mind, failure for me was never an option. Like not only academically, but just like in general. Like if I took something on, I didn't want to fail. Whether it was me studying for an AP biology test or me like joining track and field. And by the way, like I was a chubby kid. I didn't run fast. But like I joined, I was a shot putter and discus thrower,
Ooh.
terrible at it. But I always wanted to just like, if I wanted to find ways to always be improving and just like making sure that I like failure for me was never an option. And failure has like a double side to it, right? I think failure can be good because it can propel you, it can motivate you, it can help you reach farther and higher. I know for me, like as a first gen kid, the first in my family, like constantly daydreaming about what I wanted to be growing up. Whether it was at some point, it was a chiropractor because my mom had a bad back, yet she had a slip discs, and I would go with her to the chiropractor, and I was like, maybe I could be a chiropractor. Or it was a lawyer because like my dad would say, you argue so much with me, you really need to be a lawyer. Or it was like a doctor. I remember volunteering a few times at a local hospital and just like really enamored with the way like frontline workers were helping others. I think like to me, there was this combination of like, what could I be? And then like making sure I didn't fail at that thing.
Mm.
I think that translated into not excelling academically, but also just like being too much of a perfectionist. And as a result, I think that's how I ultimately translated to like my diagnosis in terms of how I reacted.
Mm.
So just to set the stage, when I was graduating undergrad, it was the summer of 2009. And I remember very vividly the Affordable Care Act was being debated across the nation. And I remember I was just like, you know what? Like I feel so selfish. I have health insurance and healthcare, and I don't even take advantage of it. And here we are fighting for millions of Americans who don't have healthcare coverage. So I was like, why don't I just go in to the doctor and check in and see how I'm doing? Literally, I was feeling 100%. I was riding on a high, had just graduated. I was getting ready to move to Sacramento. And I remember like grabbing a pee cup and I was going to pee in a cup. And I was like, I've done this before. Pee in a cup. It'll take 15 minutes, walk out the door. No biggie. I can move on with my life. And I remember I was sitting in the doctor's office for 45 minutes. I was like, this is not normal for just a regular pee test. A few minutes later, the doctor came in. He's like, hey, I was like, you know, your like protein levels in your urine are exceedingly high. And I said, well, maybe it's because I've been working out and I've been drinking protein drinks. So like, hey, maybe it's a good sign that like the protein's like making its way in there. And he's like, no, you're like 10x protein. Like that's alarming. And my heart immediately sank because I knew it was just not, wasn't a good sign. We talked about nephrosis, which is at that point like signaling that I had problems with my kidney. But I was in the middle of moving up to Sacramento. So a few months later, in the middle of like doing this like political fellowship, where I was working for a state senator at the time, I had to go and do a biopsy by myself. And if you've ever done a kidney biopsy, it's pretty scary. They lie you on your back and you have this huge machine, basically with a giant needle that they numb the area in your lower back part. And then basically a needle goes in and basically takes a tissue sample of your kidney. A week later, I was in the nephrologist's office, and to my dismay, a couple of things happened that I think really changed sort of my perspective. One, he said, hey, you have this thing called FSGS, which is focal glomerulosclerosis, which is basically like a scarring of the kidney. It means that like if you took an x-ray of my kidney and you highlighted all of the bright spots where all of these glomeruli are supposed to filter out all the toxins and waste, basically parts of my kidney were starting to dim, meaning that like this tissue was scarring over and was preventing the normal function of what the kidney is supposed to do, which is to filter out. He shared that piece. Then the other piece is like you have about 5 to 10 years before you have ultimate kidney failure. A 23-year-old who had just graduated, who's alone in Sacramento without his family and parents, didn't know anybody. Getting that news was probably the hardest thing to kick off my early 20s. And I remember just like walking from the doctor's office, kind of just like, and just like kind of like letting the information sink, and then getting into the car and just breaking down and sobbing for an hour by myself. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who to call. I just sobbed uncontrollably. And it was scary. It's just like, I don't know what that meant. And I felt so angry at myself first, because I was like, again, going back to that little boy, like failure is not an option. And here I am with the diagnosis that your kidneys are gonna fail. Doesn't matter what you do, they're gonna fail. And I just felt like my world just came apart. I just lost the sense for what I had control and what my life would be like at that point. And you know, I think as I think about my journey, and I'll make sure to pause, but I just wanted to finish up this thought, is that diagnosis like really helped me flip on its head what failure meant, right? At that point, like failure, like having that mentality of failure was not an option, actually created a lot of friction for my life. Meaning like I could do whatever I tried to lose the weight. I tried to take the steroids to reduce the progression of the kidney disease. I tried to go seek out different medical opinions, but it was all the same information. Like this, it was like a ticking time bomb, right? And I just had such a hard time. I mean, you know, grew up 23 years where you constantly like think like, oh, you're crushing it. You're getting the grades, you're getting into college, you're getting the job. And then at that point, it's like, I don't know what to do. My body's not cooperating with me. And what do I do in terms of moving forward from here? So I think that sort of kind of sets up where like what my 20s was starting to look like.
Yeah. So you were 23 when you found out this news. You had just moved to Sacramento. You found out this information in an instant, almost, right?
Yeah.
It was pretty rapid. How did that change the trajectory of your life? I'm sure you moved to Sacramento with plans. I'm sure, you know, anyone entering their 20s has only a future to look forward to and ambitions and goals. And how did that change your path?
Um, you know, working in politics, like at that point, I had envisioned, staying in Sacramento, working in policy, moving and focusing specifically on like K through 12 and post-secondary education policy and working for a few elected officials. And at that point, all I could remember thinking about is I spent maybe the next 2 months, a lot of weekends in my room, a lot of weekends like crying to myself, a lot of time spent. There was a church around my corner, around where I lived in Sacramento, and I remember that there was the only place I felt solace was just sitting there and just I went through a period of asking why me, why now, why did this happen, why is this out of my control,
Mm.
and I I just remembered that all I wanted to do was be closer to home. Like I no longer cared about being sort of running, help, running these policy and legislative proposals to me because it just didn't mean anything to me at that point. I just wanted to be closer to home, and so I sort of fast tracked my I left a little bit early from my fellowship, and took a job working in nonprofit organizations, and just started to explore like, okay, I'm living with this, like what does it mean to like what does this mean for my career, what does this mean for my mental health. I mean, at that point, a lot of my friends who knew me, I was the type of guy who would just like do a lot with little sleep. I didn't eat well. I wouldn't take care of myself. And it became, and living in Sacramento, in a super hyper intensive and where there's lots of pressure, I just realized that that was not the environment where I was going to thrive. And it wasn't going to be the environment where I was going to be the happiest. And so I needed to find something that kept me grounded, kept me connected, kept me balanced. Um, it also happened that at that point in time, independently, uh, my wife Tina, who also happened to be with me in Sacramento, we were just friends. We would talk, we would hang out, but like nothing ever came out from those interactions. We had both independently moved to LA, and she um, sort of helped me start to change my perspective. And obviously, not to sound cheesy, like love of my life really help me find myself. And I think on our second date, I had never done this before. At my second date, I kind of just put it all out on the table. We went on a 2-hour walk through downtown LA, and I basically shared like I have this thing called FSGS. My kidneys are gonna fail, yo. Like, do you still want to date me? That's kind of how you sort of had to. I was starting to take this approach that I needed to be more vulnerable, with like the people around me, and 10
Was
years
she one of
later,
the
huh?
was she one of the first people that you shared that with?
I shared with my close friends from back home, but not to the extent that I had shared with Tina.
What do
And
you think was holding you back from sharing it?
shame. It was
Mm.
shame. It was the shame of like feeling that I had contributed to the decline of my own health, even though I knew that there was literally the doctors had no idea where this was coming from. Usually kidney disease is triggered by other like underlying conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or like immunodiseases as well. But like literally nothing in my family on both sides like ever like ever popped up on anyone's radar. So I was like the first in my family. I'm like, okay, I'm the first to do a lot of things. I might as well be the first one to like tackle this disease head on. But like sharing that with her at that moment in time really just opened up to my eyes around like, how do I build better practices around sharing on what's going on with me without being a burden, right? And so I started practicing that with my employers, my managers. I started practicing that with close friends, but never to the extent where like they knew every single aspect or detail about what I was going through. And I think at that point in time, like, from the age of like 23 to about 26, 27, 28, I struggled a lot with depression. I didn't recognize it. I mean, I gained over that course of time 40 pounds. I found myself like binge watching, binge eating. And like any sort of self-esteem that had built up until the point I went to Sacramento, sort of like I started to like really, really chip away at my self-esteem. And partially that was driven by, these once a month visits to my nephrologist, which would go a little something like this. I go into the Kaiser Permanente on Sunset here in LA, park the car, take a deep breath, get myself together, walk up to the third floor, see my nephrologist, and 9 out of 10 times it was bad news. It was, your kidney function is at 50%. Your kidney function is 47%. Your kidney function is at 30%. That was a shocker when it dropped 15 percentage points. Your kidney function is at 29%. It's at 28%. And then in addition to kidney failure, right? So you're like, over 5 years, I'm literally going into doctor's visits to get bad news every single time. There was never like, hey, your kidney function went up, or hey, you've held steady for an extended period of time. It was always bad news. And I just again, that tripped and chipped away. And obviously, as you fall deeper in love with someone, as you start making plans for the future, that starts to also weigh on the other person as well. And I know Tina also carries a lot of the emotional burden that comes with living with someone with kidney disease. I don't sleep on the fact that, like, she worries as much as I worry about myself, as well as my family. And so, I got to a point where, like, oh my gosh, like, when are these kidneys going to fail? Because I need to be ready for that. And we rushed to, we started about, and I don't want to get into the politics of our healthcare system because that can be a whole another hour session.
That's a whole separate discussion we'll have later.
Totally. But basically, it's not until you hit 20% kidney function that you start to have serious conversations around transplant and dialysis. It's just built into the system. And so around when I hit 20%, we started to look out, and this was like in 2016, we started to look for potential recipients. And the first folks obviously to step up were my brother and my dad. And for a period of about 9 months, there was like extensive evaluation that both my younger brother and my dad had to go through. And and there were numerous like redos, right? Like my younger brother was overweight. His BMI was too high. They didn't feel comfortable. The dude lost 50 pounds. Like, if you ever wanted to see sacrifice and love, like, he lost 50 pounds just to be able to give his organ to me. And the next time he got evaluated, he was 5 pounds over, and they just like said, nope, we don't want to do this. He's not the right candidate, even though he was a perfect kidney match. Then we moved on to my dad. And my dad, perfect kidney match, but there was always something that needed to be fixed, whether it was his blood glucose level, even though he's not diabetic, whether it was his cholesterol, whether it was his weight. There was like a period of 4 different times where they said, your dad's almost there. We're going to wait 6 months for him to improve his results. So it was like basically 2 years worth of waiting. And, you know, in all of this time with, you know, as we're balancing, you know, my wife going off to grad school, me staying home, me staying here, and like moving jobs to, we get engaged, we're planning a wedding, and like, you know, this is like early 2017. It's the year of our wedding, and then we're like waiting, like crossing our fingers, for a transplant to happen before, like it was like transplant needs to happen before the wedding, before we go to the honeymoon, and before I started grad school, because I had been applying as well. I mean, I'm still trying to live. We're still trying to live our life and build our life, right? Because, you know, we needed to find a way to move forward, and we're juggling all of this. And I just remember very vividly, in basically June, end of May, June of 2017. This is like 3 months before all of this other events were supposed to happen. The doctor's like, look, Serge, I hate to say this, we have to get you on dialysis. At that point, I started to swell. So what ends up happening is like I'm not filtering anything anymore. My mind goes foggy, meaning like I wake up with this constant fog in my brain, which is a sign of the toxins just building up in my body. By 2 o'clock every day, I'm exhausted and I need a nap. And it was just like not sustainable anymore. So I remember like, I was like, okay, if we're going to get surgery, and surgery for me meant they're going to place a 2-foot catheter, which is this skinny little tube that's connected, that's to the left of my belly button. And I have it on now, and I keep it wrapped around my waist. And that's what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. But they were going to like, give me this surgery to put this foreign object into my body that would then get connected to this like 45-pound machine that essentially regulates fluids to get the toxins out of my body. And I remember they were sharing all of this, and I'm like, oh my God. I was like, how am I gonna do any of this? Like, this makes zero sense. And I just remember, okay, let's plan it 1 week before after my bachelor party. I was like, I want my bachelor party. I was like, I've been thinking about it. I want to go to Miami, hang out with my boys, do one more time of just being normal with my shirt off, like something as simple as like going to the beach and taking my shirt off. Like, I realized that was like gonna probably be the last time that I could feel I would feel normal again. And so had the surgery, started dialysis 6 weeks later, got married 1 month later to Tina, went on our honeymoon to Cayman Islands. By the way, like Hurricane Maria had just kind of swept through that part of the world. We had to we were supposed to ship my dialysis, these bags of solution that essentially cycle in and out of my body. Those got canceled, so we had to drag 3 bags of like 50 pounds each to our honeymoon. Had our honeymoon. I was doing dialysis on our honeymoon, and then flew back. The next day started grad school. And so there's like this new turn of events.
Nothing stops you, huh?
Where we were just like, fuck this. Sorry, I'm going to cuss. I'm like, fuck this.
That's okay.
Like,
go for it.
We have to keep like building, and we have to like figure out our new normal. So sorry, that's a lot of detail that I'm trying to compact and squeeze in, but I'm just trying to give you all a sense of it's like you fail forward almost, right? Mm-hmm. Like you you like holding on to this belief that failure wasn't an option. Well, failure is happening every single time I was going into those doctor visits. Every single time, like, I saw that my kidney function was going down. I was failing every single time when I was like fumbling through, when do I apply to grad school? When do we get married? Like, we're just failing forward as much as possible, just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think like without getting into it, that kind of fast forward to like the last big failure, which is what happened last summer.
Oh. So where were you? Okay, so you just gotten married. You were failing forward. I really like that, by the way. Um, Moving forward with plans in your life, grad school was in the future. Your health was getting progressively and progressively worse. Every single time you visited the doctor, they would give you worse and worse news about your kidney functions. You were feeling crappy most all of the time, I imagine.
Yeah.
So tell me now about that point in your life. What happened last year?
So for a dialysis patient, there are two calls that you look forward to. Okay. The first call is, we have a kidney and you're a match. So that's scenario A, where a deceased donor essentially provides a kidney that ends up being a match with you, right? Or B is your living donor, so somebody who's alive and wants to donate their kidney is a match and is ready for surgery, right? You always want to expect one or the other, right? And so in March of 2019, we got the call. After 2.5 years of extensive evaluation, my dad was finally ready to give me his kidney. And I remember, like, when I first got that call, I didn't expect it. At this point, I was like, man, I'm never going to get this kidney. I'm just going to keep doing dialysis until, like, I get off the kidney wait list. And by the way, I'm at 3 transplant centers in California, UCLA, UC Davis, and UCSF, all on average anywhere between 5 to 8 years, right, of just waiting for a transplant. So if there's ever a need for organ donation, there's always a need. But I'm particularly passionate about that. But I won't get into the politics of like our transplant system and our healthcare system. And so, getting that call I was at the Cape War Center. I remember exactly. I was at my desk. I pick up the call and it was from UC Davis. I run into a conference room and they just told me, and it's that uncontrollable sob where years and years and years of anxiety and like failing and getting bad news just kind of just lifted. And it was probably one of the happiest. I mean, obviously getting married was the happiest day of my life. But that was probably the second day that was the happiest day of our lives. It was something that, Tina and I think we just paused that day. I think I remember just like leaving work a little early and going home and just like talking about it and just getting excited and just like reimagining, what it could be like to be quote unquote gain our normalcy again, right? And so, when you get the call, it's kind of like, okay, like there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen before you're ready for surgery. So there's like, you're increasing the frequency that you go and get these pre-op tests. You have to rearrange like medical leave. So I was arranging medical leave. My wife was arranging medical leave. We're arranging medical leave for my dad at work. We were like looking at Airbnbs in Sacramento and Davis. And there was all these logistics just to get ready for a transplant. And I remember like in June, there's like 2 final steps. There's the pre-op visit that I have to do, and there's a pre-op visit that my dad has to do. I went in again in my pre-op visit, and like we were so careful. I was eating, like Tina was making sure I was eating right, that I was getting daily exercise in. Like we did not want to jeopardize like this.
And how long had it been? since you received that phone call up until this point now?
At that point, March, April, May, so 3 months. It had been three
Okay, so
months
three
since.
months of like just good news, looking forward, doing everything you can to be careful to make sure things are right. And
Yeah,
what was going
being
through your mind in terms of like
it's just like
hope and
it was just I think at that point we were just like so focused and so intentional and praying every day. My mom's like a devout Catholic. She had prayer circles like going from like here in Mexico all the way to like priests that she had met that were like hanging out in Italy, like prayer circles all around. And then my wife and her family, they're Muslim, and so they had their prayer circles here in the States, and then also in like Bangladesh. And I just like we felt really supported, but there was always this like nagging feeling in the back of our minds, like what if this doesn't happen? Because we knew that was a risk. We knew, like, you're told in advance that they could pull the plug at any point on the surgery if they felt that they weren't comfortable, either with where I was like during in my health, where my dad was in his health. And so on June 19th, I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was at the Starbucks about half a mile away from UC Davis Medical. I had dropped off my parents because my dad was doing his pre-op. And I remember really vividly, I was on a call with my colleagues at the Cape War Center. We were working through some final things. I was like wrapping up work because I was going to take leave of absence for 3 months. And then I get 2 missed calls from my mom. And she texted me, and immediately when I saw that, like I was like, like they're not supposed to be done for an hour. And I was just like, I just hung up my conference call and called them. And I could tell right away, like her voice was like really, really quiet. And she said, you need to get here right away. You need to come and talk to the doctor. The doctor has news to share with you. And I asked her, I was like, is this good news? She's like, no, it's not. At that point, my wife had also been with us in Sacramento. She was off doing some work, and I called her. I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I need you to get down here. My brother Ulysses is a doctor in GI. He's always been our go-to in our family. I texted him. I was like, I need you on this phone call. I need everyone to hear this information. I don't know what's going on. I'm just prepping you for whatever's. And I walk into the doctor's office, and the head of nephrology was there. So it wasn't just our nephrologist, the head of the department. And my parents are sitting down, my mom and dad crying. And I'm like, I remember sitting down, and it's sort of like I left my body, and I was looking from the outside at this whole situation where I'm sitting, my wife is sitting there, my parents are sitting there, my brother's on his phone, and all I could hear was this ringing in my head. And like the ringing would go in and out. And I remember just hearing things like, we don't feel comfortable with, we missed this in the x-ray. It presents a high risk for your dad. And then ultimately we have to cancel your transplant surgery.
no.
And I asked the doctor to tell me again why they were canceling it. And they admitted that it was an oversight on their end. So they messed up. They fucked up. They had x-rays for 3.5, 4 months that clearly showed in the x-ray that there was some like scoliosis. So it's for my dad, he's like in his 60s, which is pretty normal. But there was just enough there was too much of it on the artery of the kidney that he was going to give me that they just felt really uncomfortable with proceeding for the surgery. So in the matter of 30 minutes, right, I walked in the door, not unbeknownst to me, and walked out the door like with nothing in hand. Like everything was canceled. And, I keep painting this image of like parking lots and hospitals, because it's like, it was the first time in a long time where I had my family there, and I just like, I didn't know what to do. I was just walking in. I kind of just like everything in my body tightened up, and we obviously left. You know, we didn't yell at the doctor, but we were really pissed, and we made it known like our disappointment and what actions we were going to take to figure out what happened. And my wife and I are walking, looking for the car. I don't remember where I parked the car, and it's just, I just remember just completely breaking down again. And I think that what was more painful was watching her break down, and watching my dad break down, and watching my mom break down, and just like everybody, you know, like transplant is not something that just impacts you, it impacts your loved ones, and it impacts their hopes and their dreams for your child, for your husband, for your brother. And I think that to me just like ripped me apart. And I felt like I had failed again. And I remember that week I took some extra time off of work, just to recap. And I remember just like there's this one moment where we went to Monterey because I still wanted to find a way to honor my dad, and I wanted to get him a massage, and I just wanted to get away from all of it with just my family. And I remember that I was on the 17-mile drive. We pulled over, and I just needed to just cry. And I just remember I don't remember what happened, but I was just sitting there with Tina, and she was holding my hand, and I just like remember just like breaking down and kneeling and just like asking myself like why this was happening, and like what was I supposed to learn, like how was I gonna rebuild, like what does it mean to like wait again, and like do I hope again, like I was just lost. And you know, at that point we both ended up, you know, needing to go into therapy and just like really work through our grief. We were both grieving. And, you know, I've lost loved ones and folks that were close to me, but I never experienced this type of grief before. And I think for me, I think for us, it was just a moment of just pausing and really pausing and reevaluating what we were trying to accomplish with the transplant. I think we thought we were trying to accomplish a normal life, and sort of like just waiting and holding our breaths until like we didn't have this machine in our life that sleeps with us. I mean, literally, it is like I'm connected to the machine while I'm sleeping next to my wife. Like this machine is intrusive. It is a part of me. It is a part of my day to day. And I think we're just looking for a little, just like being normal again, and not having to figure out all of the logistics of what I've alluded to before, to just move through these milestones in your life. And so, you know, through therapy and just getting counsel and talking to family and prayer, I think we started to slowly but surely over the course of 3 months started to like reevaluate and rethink of like, okay, we need to let go of what this aspiration to be normal, because nothing of what we are as a couple, as what we're experiencing, and is not normal. Like it's just not normal. And I remember very clearly that we wanted to plan a trip to Europe. And it was ambitious because it was like we were doing it because we wanted to get away, we wanted to reconnect, but we wanted to reestablish a new norm and challenge ourselves to say, hey, we can live freely, and we can live the life that we want. Doesn't matter if the transplant is today, tomorrow, or in 2 or 3 years. 3 years, we'll get there. And I think for me, our trip to Europe, we went to Paris and to Spain. It was, the logistics of this was like mind-boggling, because it was like getting like like literally shipping, I think, over 2,000 pounds of dialysis solution to my friend Robbie's apartment in Paris, where he was there for 2 years, and getting like not only just like getting there, but also visiting 13 cities in 15 days. Like that
Wow.
meant like airplanes, trains, and lugging my machine and lugging like on average 200 pounds of solution with us everywhere we went. I
Wow.
mean, it just became our mantra, like, fuck this. I'm over it. You're over it. We want to go explore the world and we want to live the life that we want. And
Mm.
that trip, as hard as it was like the most amazing trip we've ever taken, because not only it wasn't because we were in Paris and visiting all of these historic sites. It was because literally she and I were powering through all of these logistics, all of these cities, all of these hotels, all of these days, and doing 11 hours a day of dialysis, even if it meant breaking it up so that we could. My wife just said, sorry for my ambitious travel planning. She's very ambitious when it comes to travel, and it's just a thing. I'm more of like, put on a Hawaiian shirt and hang out at the beach for like 7 days, you know?
Yeah.
But it was that experience that really proved to us that it didn't matter like what our preconceptions of normal were before. Like what we're doing is recreating a new normal for us. And it might look like really like stressful and chaotic on the outside to people, but for us it's the only way that we find certainty amongst the uncertain, which is like, when are we going to get the next transplant?
And so it's been a couple years, or it's been a year since you received that news. Tell us where you are today. What headspace are you in? I can only imagine that the pandemic has complicated this even more than it was before. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing better. I think we're in a good headspace. I mean, here's the reality is I'm very grateful for frontline workers who manage dialysis clinics day in, day out. I'm fortunate enough that the type of dialysis that I do is home based. So it is, yes, it's 11 hours, but I'm in the safety of my own home. And I go to dialysis clinics once a month for my monthly labs, and basically checkups and medication. And they've taken steps to like, they're in full PPE gear. They sanitize every single time a patient comes in and a patient leaves. They have protocols for how many people are in the lobby. They're mindful that you don't use your hands to open doorknobs. I mean, I am so grateful to healthcare workers who are not just on the front lines of battling COVID in hospitals, but also healthcare workers that are dealing with patients with chronic illness, right? Kidney, like, you know, your disease doesn't go away just because COVID is here. It means like you have to take extreme measures and precautions. So, you know, we've been really mindful around like wearing gloves when we go out, wearing masks, like putting on glasses, you know, sanitizing, Clorox, like hand sanitizer. I mean, it is particularly stressful because there's not a lot of conclusive information around, like information around what would happen if, I mean, we've seen in the news of like what would happen if a normal person, and I say normal, like healthy person, gets COVID, but we have very limited information on what happens if a kidney patient, a dialysis patient gets. And every time I've asked doctors, it's like, it's pretty much the severe version of everything that you see. What is supposed to be mild will be severe for you, because I am immunocompromised, right? Like that's just the reality of what I'm living with. And it's a mind fuck. I don't know how else to explain it. Like
Mm.
living with the anxiety, like my wife lives with the anxiety, my parents live with the anxiety. We are living with the anxiety. And but at the same time, we've taken a lot of precautions to keep ourselves safe and keep others safe as well. And so, you know, I'm just, you know, I can't express the amount of gratitude I have for employers, the Capor Center, who just have provided their staff a lot of flexibility to work
Mm.
from home. And you know, my team in many ways has shown up with for me in different ways. Whether they're constantly reaching out to me, checking in with me, and you know, I feel like over the last year we've been able to develop such a loving support and network amongst friends and colleagues and coworkers, because you know, at the end of the day, this is scary for everyone. You know, I
Yeah.
think everyone has a specific set of circumstances, and we shouldn't place a judgment on who has it better or who has it worse. I think the risk is high for everyone, and it's just that everyone has a different journey in terms of where they are with this.
Yeah. And your journey, thank you so much for sharing it, because I mean, it definitely has been a roller coaster for you. You have lived with this for the better part of your life now, and you received disappointing news with regards to the transplant, a year ago. But it sounds like you're still powering through. You're still looking forward. You're still starting things, businesses, running things. What hope do you have for the future right now?
Um, you know, like I I would love to have a transplant in the near future. That hope never goes away. Um, it's something I know Ramadan and Eid just passed, and that's something that my wife and I have prayed for
Mm,
consistently. And it's not something that you lose hope for. We don't hinge our bets on it anymore. Like, you know, we're not trying to build our life around it like we were before. And
mm,
I think our hope is eventually a transplant again. And but also just like looking forward to like starting a family, you know, and growing my business, and you know, and getting healthier, and you know, like for some weird reason, COVID-19, I've lost weight, not gained weight, and that was partly because I was eating out a lot and
mm.
sneaking in burgers behind Tina's back when I wasn't supposed to. And so I've actually like now I'm on this new health kick. Like, okay, like jump starting like weight loss again and working out, and you know, there's so much to look forward to, and like
You know,
honestly, like um being able to process and share things is really liberating. You know, I feel like the shame of all those failures and mini failures and big failures just like kind of go away. And you realize that what stays with you is just the how, it gives you an acknowledgement of how resilient and persevering you can be, but you
mm,
have to spend time focusing on you, and you have to learn ultimately to love and prioritize yourself. And I think I've learned that lesson over and over again, but I think for the last year that was particularly true. It was the first time that I think I counted. I went to 52 therapy appointments. Like I had never taken on my mental health in that kind of way. And I was so proud that I was consistent. And on the days I didn't want to go, I still forced myself to go. And I still think there's more work to be done, but I think more than ever, just rebuilding my mental fortitude, and it is really helping to contribute to the like a more positive outlook on things now.
well, thank you so much. This is such an inspiring story. You are, I know you don't do any of this to be inspiring, but just to see your resilience, to see your optimism, to see the hope that you still have and the love that you have for your family and your wife is just incredible. So thank you again. And I speak I'm sure on behalf of everyone listening that I'm truly moved, and I'm so glad that you were able to share your story with us. Is there, just for us, we're about to wrap up, but is there any message, having gone through this unique experience, that you want other people who may not be familiar or may not have a loved one going through something like this to know?
Yeah. Um, I think it's so important to check in on your friends and colleagues and your family